Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be breaking down the 10 worst champions in League for patch 9.19. So to start things off here, at the number 10 spot is going to be a top lane pick, and it's going to be Aurelia. So Aurelia, ever since her rework, has been a pretty difficult champion for Riot to balance, just because if played to her fullest potential, Aurelia can be a very devastating champion, which is why we have seen her being played in pro quite a bit. She's had a ton of success in higher elos and in pro play, but because of that, it's led to repeated nerfs. Like, the amount of nerfs Aurelia has received since her rework is actually kind of insane. She used to have the disarm in her kit, that's gone now. She used to have bonus damage against shielding champions, that's gone now. There's just so many things that have been taken out of Aurelia's kit. Her W no longer reduces magic damage, it only reduces physical damage, and those are only a few of the nerfs Aurelia has received since her rework. It's left her in a pretty bad spot in solo queue, and just compared to the other bruiser champions right now, if you want to succeed on Aurelia, you need to be able to play her at a much higher level than the other bruiser champions. You've got picks right now like Renekton, Darius, Jax, who are just much more easy to execute, and they also do very well into Aurelia. Aurelia's matchups right now against these other bruiser top laners are just pretty poor. The most picked champions in this patch at the moment are Fiora, Riven, Jax, Renekton, and Darius, and Aurelia struggles against all 5 of those champions. So due to nerfs, due to her matchups being pretty bad right now, Aurelia top lane just isn't a pick really worth playing. So taking on the number 9 spot here is going to be Corki, and it seems like ever since Corki has now solidified his spot as a mid lane champion, he's either been a super strong mid lane pick or he's been a very weak mid lane pick. There's never really been a point to where Corki's been an average mid lane champion or to where he's been a solid pick where he's got a decent pick rate, decent win rate. He's either super strong or he's super weak, and right now he is on the weaker side. Back in 9.16, he got a change to his base stats to where his base attack damage got reduced from 60 all the way down to 55, so a 5 damage nerf there. His attack damage growth also got reduced from 3 down to 2.5, and these nerfs might not seem super big on paper, but the fact that base AD is very valuable to Corki since he does go for Trinity Force Rush, and because Trinity Force's damage, the proc on Trinity Force from Sheen, it does scale off of your base AD. That nerf is actually really big to Corki because it drastically does decrease the amount of DPS he's going to do, and ever since that nerf he did receive in 9.16, he has been performing very poorly in solo queue. You also have to take into account that Corki does not provide anything for his team unless he's dealing damage. He's a mid lane champion who's just a pure damage champion, no crowd control in this champion's kit at all. So if you fall behind with Corki, or even if you're going even, a lot of the time you're just going to be providing a lot less for your team than your average mid lane champion. So you really need to be able to play this champion at a high level in order to succeed with him, which does make him a much more difficult pick to succeed with in solo queue. So at the number 8 spot is going to be Azir, and Azir is a champion that's been very difficult for Riot to balance over the years, just because whenever this champion is strong for pro play, it doesn't usually mean he's strong in solo queue. When Azir's been a top tier pick in pro play, solo queue Azir has still been a pretty average champion. I don't think solo queue Azir has ever really been an S tier pick or like a god tier champion in the mid lane, but whenever he has been a god tier pick in the pro scene, it's meant that solo queue Azir just ends up getting weaker because pro Azir gets nerfed, solo queue Azir drops down even further, and we're just going to be in this never ending cycle to where whenever Azir pops up in pro play, he's going to get nerfed. As a result, it's going to make solo queue Azir even weaker, and it just puts him in a spot to where he's just never really going to have the chance to be a good pick in solo queue. If Riot ever want Azir to be a strong pick in solo queue, I'm just gonna have to give him a mini rework or change his kit in some way, shape, or form, because for the past couple of years, they've been trying to give him changes to make him strong in solo queue and not make him overpowered in the pro scene, but that just has not happened. So I think it's about time he finally gets some sort of a mini rework in this upcoming season here for season 10, because if they don't, then he's always gonna be at best an average champion in solo queue, and at worst, one of the weakest champions that you can play. Next up at the number 7 spot is going to be Silas. In 9.19, he ended up getting hit with some pretty big nerfs, a really big nerf to his passive in this patch. He also got some base stat nerfs, but I think those got reversed. They got hotfixed back into his kit because he was performing at around a 40% win rate at the start of this patch, so just extremely weak in solo queue. It seems like almost every single champion that Riot has released in the past year has been a nightmare to balance. It seems like almost every second patch, either Silas, Akali, Yumi, you name it, any champion that's been released in the past year, it seems like has been getting some sort of buff or some sort of a nerf every single patch, just because their kits are so overloaded that it's so difficult to balance these champions for both the pro scene and solo queue. So at the number 6 spot here is going to be Gnar, and in the current state of the solo queue top lane meta, Gnar just has a very hard time succeeding. You see a lot of bruiser top laners right now who have gap closers, and those champions have just always done very well into Gnar. You got Fiora, Riven, Renekton, Jax, Kled all being played a lot right now, and those are just such difficult matchups for Gnar because whenever he's in mini form, if those champions just jump on top of them with their gap closers, stun him, he just really can't do anything in return, and he's just going to get out traded really heavily in those matchups. Gnar does succeed a lot more in melee matchups to where the enemy does not have a gap closer, or tank matchups in the top lane, but for solo queue, tanks really aren't being played at all right now, and melee bruisers without gap closers also are being played a lot less. So just Gnar's matchups in the top lane, the way the top lane meta is for solo queue, it really doesn't suit Gnar very well. He's a champion that's much more difficult to execute in solo queue than in the pro scene as well, because you really aren't going to be able to play around his Mega Gnar in solo queue. It's very difficult to get your team, especially in the lower elos, to understand that and to play around it. So your team fighting as Gnar is going to be lackluster a lot of the time. You're never really going to be able to find that super good engage in a team fight with your Mega Gnar to where your team is super coordinated and ready to go in with you. So that's another aspect of his kit that just doesn't really translate well into solo queue. Number 5 on the list is going to be Sejuani. So if this were 9.18, I don't think I'd have Sejuani on this list, but with the nerf she did receive in 9.19, she is now one of the weakest solo queue junglers. With a lot of other tank junglers being buffed for solo queue over the past couple of patches here, it's just pretty bad for Sejuani because she's been nerfed and she was already a pretty average pick in solo queue. The only reason she's been nerfed recently is because of pro play. It's not because of solo queue, because she's still been performing pretty weak in solo queue overall. So with other junglers getting buffed in solo queue too recently, like Zac, like Mundo, these tank junglers are just much stronger than Sejuani. If you want to play a tank jungler right now, then there's no reason to really pick Sej over somebody like a Nunu, a Zac, a Mundo. These picks are just much better to carry with in solo queue. So it kind of sucks because the champion was already in a pretty bad spot before, but because of pro play, she now becomes in an even weaker state. At the number 4 spot here is going to be a support pick, and it's going to be Braum. Now, when doing the research for this video, I took a look at the patch history for Braum, and I tried to find out when the last time it was this champion got buffed, and he actually has not received a single buff since his release back in season 3 or season 4. I'm not too sure which season it was, but it was like 6 seasons ago, and this champion has only been nerfed ever since his release. I just feel like right now, compared to a lot of the other melee supports, Braum just lacks that raw carry potential that you're looking for in a solo queue support. When you take a look at the strongest solo queue supports right now, you got Nautilus, really good CC, great lockdown, a lot of damage in his kit, can burst somebody out super quickly. You got Blitzcrank, one hook in lane with Blitz can just win you the lane. You got Thresh, same thing, Pike kind of similar. With Braum, you're not really able to do any of those things. You do a lot of things decent with Braum. You got pretty good peel in your kit, you have decent engage, you have decent lockdown, but you don't really do anything super well, which I feel like is something that's holding Braum back at the moment. So number 3 is going to be Calista. So the only AD carry I have on this list, I feel like AD carry right now is honestly pretty balanced for solo queue. You got a lot of different AD carries that you can pick right now and have good success with, but I feel like Calista is still that one outlier at the moment. Calista right now is just too difficult to play for the average player, and even if you can play her to a high level, I just don't feel like she's rewarding. Like if you put the time into Calista and you can play her super well, I still don't think she's rewarding compared to a lot of the other AD carry picks. The only reason as to why you'd really consider picking Calista right now is because of her strong early game paired up with some of the aggressive supports, but even then, why would you pick Calista, who's only got a good early to mid game, falls off pretty hard in the late game, when you can pick Caitlyn, who also has a great early game, but scales much better into the mid to late game? There's just no point in really picking Calista right now over other AD carries, and it's just left her in a pretty bad spot for solo queue. So at the number 2 spot is going to be Yumi, and if this were 9.18, Yumi probably wouldn't be on here, but with the nerf she did receive in 9.19, it kind of just ended it all for Yumi in solo queue. Now, as of the recording of this video, Yumi is sitting at the lowest win rate for any support in the game at 40 or 41%. Now, you can definitely argue that because Yumi is a very unique champion and because she's a champion that a lot of players are just going to be picking up right away and not really understanding how to play, her win rate would be lower, and I can definitely agree with that. In previous patches, her win rate was around like 45, 46%, but she was still a pretty good pick for solo queue. I don't think she was weak, even though her win rate was quite a bit lower than most other support picks. But there becomes a point to where once a champion's win rate drops so low, you can't really make the argument anymore that it's just bad players playing the champion bringing her win rate down. Once a champion's win rate drops to like 40 or 41% like it is right now, I just don't think you can make that argument really, and because her win rate has dropped this low for solo queue, I just really don't think she's worth playing right now compared to a lot of the other supports. So at the number 1 spot, taking the cake here is going to be Tome Kench. So I'm more so referring to support Kench in this video here. Top lane Tome is also pretty weak at the moment. You could definitely argue for him to be on this list as well, but for support Kench right now, he's sitting at a very similar win rate to Yumi, fluctuating from around like 39 to 42% in solo queue, so just very poor at the moment. Tome's a champion that's been very hard for Riot to balance too. He's a pick that always does pretty well in the pro scene, but he's never really been a champion to do that well in solo queue. Tome requires a lot more coordination than your average support pick in order for you to succeed with him to his fullest potential. He's not really a pick that's going to solo carry games. When you think of Tome Kench, you just don't think of that 1v9 support pick who's just going to steal games or who's just going to make that sick play that's going to end up winning his team the game. That doesn't really happen with Tome Kench. Every few games you might find that clutch W in a team fight to save your AD carry and prevent him from getting caught out, but that's only going to happen every so often, and it feels like more often than not your W usage, or at least when I have Tome Kench players on my team, their W usage is more often going to hurt your team than help your team. Tome's laning phase right now is horrendously weak, especially if you're going up against double ranged. If you're going up against something like a Zyra support especially, you're just going to be shoved in the entire laning phase. You're going to be getting poked out 24/7. You're not going to be able to make any proactive plays in the early game, and you just really lack that carry potential with Tome's support. I just feel like if you're picking Tome right now down in the support role, you're basically coin flipping with the champion. You're hoping your top lane and your mid lane end up winning. You're hoping that your team can carry you throughout the mid lane, because you surely will not be able to carry your team yourself. So that is going to be all for the video, guys. These were the 10 worst champions that you can play for solo queue for patch 9.19. So just keep in mind that these are the worst champions for solo queue and not for pro play. Some of these champions you might actually still see being played at Worlds, and they might actually be picked a little bit, but pro play is a lot different from solo queue. Picks don't always translate from pro into solo queue, which is the case for a lot of these champions here. So with that being said, guys, hopefully you did enjoy the video. If you did, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.